Hello and welcome back to Breeze Gaming. Today we have a video looking at how to create a custom grid inside of Python using Pygame. So what we're going to be doing is basically creating a canvas and then we're going to be creating a grid on top of that canvas with Pygame. So to get started, we are inside of Jupyter Notebook right now and we have two screens. We have the one on the left is the final code for creating that grid that I'm using, and then on the right is just a basic canvas. And I'm going to walk through step by step how to create that grid for y'all. So the first thing we're going to do is walk through how to create the grid, and then afterwards, if you would like to see, I'm going to show you how to create and put an object on top of that grid essentially with Pygame. So this is the scenario for this if you're trying to create a grid inside of your game or some kind of grid-based game or animation, anything inside of Python. This is a method for doing that. And the wonderful thing about Python is there's always multiple ways to do everything. There's not one way to create a grid, so this isn't the one way to do it. There's multiple ways. So feel free to use whatever method you would like and edit this to however you would like. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the import module. We're going to import Pygame and sys, which is system. And the next thing we're going to do is go into the display module. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to create some lowercase values just so I don't have to hold down the caps key. But what we're going to be doing is you can label these however you would like. I'm just creating some basic variables for the size of our display. So our display is the canvas, what we're going to be drawing the grid on top of. And all I'm doing is creating variables for the window height and the window width, which is 1,000. But you can feel free to make the size of the canvas whatever you would like. It depends on your screen. It depends on your preference. But for me, I like 1,000. The next thing that we're doing here are these next two values are the RGB or red, green, blue values for the colors we're going to be using. So like I said, whatever color you want your screen and your grid to be, this is what we are just essentially doing right here. If there is a specific color you want to use for your grid or your screen, you can look up RGB values or you can just type in directly the color that you want, depending on what that color is. But I'm just going to do this for now. Just create a black and white variable, and then screen color is the actual screen, the variable we're going to use to fill the screen, which is black. And then that is all we need to do for the display module. The object module we'll get to at the end of the video after we do the grid. And this is where I will show you how to input and place some kind of object on top of the grid. So next we're going to go into the game loop definition module, which we are just creating a definition for our game loop, and we are implementing our game loop at the very end of our code in this final cell game loop, and we just run this last cell and all the code that we want runs. So we're going to do definition game loop, global, screen, and clock. So global just allows whatever variables we put afterwards just to be accessible throughout the entire code. So global, screen, clock. The clock is not necessary for this, but for practice sake, for developing future games and such, I just like to put that in there for practice. So the screen is obviously what we are drawing the grid on top of, and the clock is essentially setting the frames per second. But since this isn't going to be involving time, it's not necessary, but feel free to put it in there for practice if you like. So we're going to do pygame.initialize, where we're just essentially initializing Pygame. So we can use it. So this next one, display.set mode, all that's doing is setting the size of our screen using the variables we created before. So whatever you name the variables, or you can just put the direct size in here. Whatever you created for the variables, you can put that in here. I'm just doing window height and width using the variables that I created already. There you go. And then pygame.display.set caption is literally just setting a title. This is also, in addition to the clock, completely optional. But if you like titles, you like captions, and you want to put one in, you can put that in here. You also can put this other places as well. But I'm just going to put it inside of the game loop. The next thing is the clock, like I said, unnecessary for this tutorial. But if you're trying to create any kind of game or animation that involves time, you definitely want some kind of clock that sets FPS. So this is good practice for the future. All right, screen.fill, or something you do need. So this is setting the actual color of our screen. If we want to make a white grid on top of a black screen, we can put whatever variable we want. We can just put the word black in here, um, whatever works. But we're going to just use the variable that I created, just for variable sake. So while true, this is our game loop. We'll get back to the screen.blit. That's just placing an object on top of our screen, but we'll get back to that when we after we create the grid. We're going to do definition draw grid, and I'm going to go down after I finish this and create that definition, and we're going to say for event in pygame.event.get, and what this is doing is the code is looking for any kind of active events inside of our game loop. And it's specifically, we're going to ask it to look for any kind of quit events. So a quit event is anything that's going to exit or quit the system. And if there is a quit event, what we're going to do is just quit Pygame and then exit the system. So it's important on the pygame.quit. There's no parentheses. If you have an error, you might have accidentally put a parentheses there. I've made that mistake many times before. Struggling, wondering where is the error in my code, and it's like one parentheses, and it's like great. All right, so pygame.quit system.exit, and what we're going to do is refresh the screen. So what this does is pygame.display.update is it refreshes and redraws everything every time this loop runs. And the clock.tick, like I said, unnecessary for this tutorial, but it is setting the FPS, so you can put that in there. All right, the next thing we're going to do, now that we created the game loop definition, is we're going to go down and create our draw grid definition. So the first thing we're going to do is set the block size. Now the block size, you can have one or two variables for this. This is setting the actual size of the blocks within your grid. If you want a block size with a different x and y value, you can create two variables, one for x and one for y, and you can set those accordingly in the code. But since I want my blocks to be perfect squares with the same x and y values, I'm just going to create one variable. So window width, and then block size, which is 50. So what this is doing is saying for x in range of essentially the width, and then we're going to do, I'm not supposed to capitalize the x, for y in range of 0, and then not 0, the window height, which is that. And then we're going to do block size again, which, like I said, is the same. They're both 50, and then we're going to say rect, which is rectangle, equals pygame.rect, and what we're doing is this is the process where we are creating and drawing the rectangle for our grid onto the canvas. So you also have block size variables here again. I'm using the same size, so I have the same variable, and we're going to do pygame.draw.rect, and then the first variable, this screen, we want to draw the rectangle on the screen, and then we want it to be white, which I remember I just lowercase that. So white, and then rect, and then 1, and this is going to create our actual grid right here. So I'm going to go ahead and run all of this, restart and run all. Hopefully there's no errors. And there is an error, unindent. Did I indent wrong? Sure enough, clock size. Wow, oh, that's hilarious. I'm not block size. That's funny. And then I also need to indent. Yeah, I messed up. Well, I made 2 errors. That is funny. I always make an error. Invalid syntax again. I always forget those comments. I cannot stop making errors today. Another error, but yeah, this is just getting embarrassing. Did I misspell Pygame somewhere? See, this is what happens when I talk and type at the same time. Luckily, Python is here to correct me. Restart and run all. It's funny because I'm Wow, I really need to correct this because I misspelled window, this height. HGT. Where did I miss that? Global screen dot clock. Wow. Okay. I apologize about the error. The errors. My bad. Okay, there we go. Finally, look at that after correcting multiple errors. Okay, so this is the grid that we're trying to create. We created the black screen, and now we have the white grid on top of it, and this is the basic grid. You can change the whatever block size you want. If maybe I want 100 block size, as you increase the block size, your blocks will get bigger. We're going to do restart and run all again, and this time it's going to give me. I need to exit out. Restart and run all. Thank you. Look at that. Now I have much bigger block sizes. So, or you could like cut that down to 25, restart and run all. One more time. Yeah, now you have a much smaller grid. So depending on what you want the grid for, you can change the block size. For me, I want to do 50. So if all you want to know is how to create a grid, this is the basic code for that. Like I said, this is not the only way to do it. There's multiple ways. And hopefully you don't make as many errors as I did. I apologize. But that is just, the basic grid with a couple of other additions like a clock just for fun. But that's essentially what the grid is it's just this definition down here for drawing the grid, and you have your game loop, your basic architecture for a game loop, and then you throw the draw grid definition in there, and it will draw the grid that you want every time. But that is the basics of how to create a basic grid. So if that's all you want, you can end right there. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. But if you want to stick around, I will show you how to create and put an object in there. So going over here to my code, all I did is I just created a custom object that I called Cobalt inside of Illustrator. And I'm going to uncheck all the hashtags there. And I'm going to run it on this side. Restart and run all. There we go. So I just created this object right here, and I just put it on top of the grid in one of these cells. So essentially in this object module, what I have is I have the variable that I want for the object. So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to call it, I'm going to call it something different up here so it's easier. Just call it object. So this is the object I want to put inside of the grid, and I'm going to do pygame.image.load. So what I'm doing is I'm loading an image from my file, an image file from my computer, I should say. And this is the location. Sorry, I should say the name of the file, the image that I want. And anytime you want to load some kind of image file inside of Pygame, and specifically if you're using Jupyter Notebook, it's very helpful to have the actual name of the file that you want. So inside of my file folder, I have the actual image. So when you're trying to load in an image into Pygame, I highly recommend having that image in the same file as your actual code source file. That'll make things much easier. So I have the PNG right there that I want to use, and I need to make sure I have double quotations, or just two quotations around it. And the next thing I'm going to do is object, and I'm going to call it object transform. So what this is doing is it's transforming the object for me. So the actual object, the image for me, I should say, because the image file is actually a size I don't want. It's not going to fit inside of my screen. So what I'm doing is I'm transforming it using the scale feature to transform it to the size I want. So I'm going to call it object, and all I'm doing is, just for sake so you can understand this better, I'm changing these variables just so it makes more sense. And I want to change it to 50/50. So if you remember, the block size I decided for the grid is 50/50. So what Pygame does when it loads in an image is it turns it, at least the way I'm doing it, is turning it into a rectangle. So it's turning that image file into a rectangle, and what I'm defining it as I'm changing it to a size using the transform scale option to 50/50 from the original size of the image, and which is the same size as the block. So that's really helpful if you're whatever your block size is, you can load in images, create them as rectangles and create them as the same sizes as your blocks if you're trying to put things in the actual blocks of your grid. So 50-50, and then we're going to do object transform, and then we're going to do underscore rect, which is rectangle, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put except we're going to do object transform dot get rect. So what this is doing is it's converting it to a rectangle, and then now we're going to do object transform dot underscore rect dot x, and then we're going to do the same thing except dot y. Just going to copy paste, and then what this is doing is setting the actual location of the object. So 5450 is setting the location that I want the object to be placed. So 50 is the x, and then 450 is the y. So it's important to note that when you have any kind of grid, Python looks at 0, 0 axis at the top left. So a normal grid that you're used to starts at the 0, 0s at the bottom left, but in Python, in Pygame, it's at the top left. So what this is doing is if I want it to be at 50, if I want my object to be at 50, 450, it's going to start up here at the top left, and it's going to go 50, and then it's going to go down 450. So just keep that in mind whenever you're putting something using coordinates in Pygame. So 50, 450, and then the next thing we're going to do is screen.blit. So screen.blit is used for placing objects on to the screen. So we're going to do screen.blit, and what we're going to do is the object, and then object transform. So we want our we don't want the actual object because that's not the right size. So we want the transformed object, and then we're going to do object transform underscore rect, which is the rectangle. So we're putting that rectangle around it. And this, when I run this, start run all, it should give me what I want. Of course, I had an error. Oh, that's hilarious. So it's not in the actual the file image I want is not in the location that I want it to be. So just for sake, I'm going to move it to what's it called? Breeze Gaming Tutorials. So just I'm just going to move it. Yeah. That is why I had the error. So now I've moved that, and it should be over here, and it is here. So now that is my video. Now it should run. Let's go ahead and restart and run all that again, and it should run. There we go. Yep, there it is. So yeah, just make sure the image file is in the same folders you're supposed to go to if you're going to do this. So there it is. I placed it at 5450, and there's my object inside of the grid. So that is how you place an object, on top of your grid. So if you're trying to create a game, animation, whatever, you can create as many objects as you want, and you can put them inside of the game loop, and then on top of your grid. And so that's basically essentially how you do that. So that's how you create a grid, and then an object, put an object on top of your grid inside of Pygame. So that is all for today's video. I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you again, and bye.